Imagine a government just spending millions upon millions of dollars. Like they pour thousands of tons of concrete, they bring in these massive fleets of cranes, and they just build block after block of shiny brand new apartments.
Right, a total transformation on paper.
Exactly. And all of this is supposed to solve this severe urban crisis. The ribbon is cut, the politicians are all smiling for the cameras, and yeah, it looks like a massive victory.
Oh, absolutely. It's the ultimate photo op.
Right. But then, like a decade later, someone actually looks at the data, like the real numbers, and realizes they didn't fix the city at all.
Yeah, not even close.
They just built a nicer-looking gangland. So welcome to this custom deep dive. We put this together specifically for you because we know you have this like intense curiosity about how complex large-scale systems operate in the real world.
And maybe more importantly, why those massive systems sometimes fail so spectacularly, despite, everyone having the absolute best intentions.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Because the gap between the glossy architectural rendering of a project and the gritty daily reality of how it actually functions on the ground, that's where the most valuable lessons are.
And the source material we're pulling from today is, it's an absolute masterclass in exploring that exact gap.
Oh, completely. We have our hands on this really fascinating document from 2025. It's titled The City Doctor's Audit Memo. And it's just this comprehensive, honestly unsparing look at the urban renewal of Colón.
Which was a massive real-world initiative that ran from 2012 all the way to 2025.
Right. And to give you some context on the source itself, this report was prepared by Mariano Bernardes. He operates under what's called the City Doctors Framework, which is associated with the Kaufman Center think tank.
And also the International Society for Societal Performance, or the ISSP.
Yeah, the ISSP. And their analytical framework is just incredibly rigorous. They don't just look at like whether a building is standing, they look at whether the society inside it is actually functioning.
Which is a crucial distinction.
So our mission today is to use this audit to explore a really profound question. Why doesn't building thousands of new homes automatically fix a broken city? We're going to decode the audit's radical blueprint for a systemic recovery. But before we get to the solution, I have to give you the hook from this memo.
Yeah, it's a gut punch.
It really is. It's just a damning conclusion. The audit explicitly states that the Colón project didn't fail because it lacked cement. It didn't fail because it lacked cranes or workers. It failed because it lacked an operating system.
And that phrase alone, it changes the entire paradigm. We're so used to thinking of an operating system in terms of, like, our phones or computers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But applying it to a city, suggesting that a municipality requires this hidden software to make the physical hardware actually function, it's a completely different way to evaluate urban planning.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on the surface, setting up a contrast between what the city looked like it was doing versus what was actually happening, it's really jarring. If you walk through Colón during this 13-year renewal period, you'd see a massive construction boom.
Oh, cranes everywhere, dirt moving.
Right. Tangible, physical progress happening every single day. So, why is this audit so intensely critical of that exact effort?
Well, to understand the bold solutions they propose for 2026 and beyond, we first have to precisely define the exact nature of the failure leading up to 2025. And you're absolutely correct about the physical progress, by the way.
So they did actually build the stuff.
Oh, yeah. The Ministry of Housing and Territorial Planning, they're known as MIVEO, they were incredibly successful at producing physical assets.
Okay, so the hardware got built.
Exactly. We're talking thousands of housing units, major infrastructure upgrades, vast public works. The concrete was poured, and the keys were quite literally handed over to residents.
Which, to the average person sounds like a total win. Like, if you have a housing deficit and you build thousands of houses, problem solved, right?
You'd think so, yeah.
The government did its job.
But the executive verdict of the audit just brings down the hammer on that exact assumption. They classify this massive, multi-million-dollar intervention as a high-output, low-recovery initiative.
High output, low recovery.
Yes. Aviat absolutely built the physical stock, but they completely failed to flip the city's underlying performance equilibrium.
Meaning they confused physical motion with actual societal progress.
Precisely. They optimized a specific subsystem housing and public works, but they left the core illness of the city entirely intact. And the audit defines that illness signature very, very clearly.
Right, and we should translate some of that think tank terminology here, because what it means on the ground is pretty terrifying.
Yeah, we're talking about territorial coercion, entrenched gang economies, widespread unemployment, and just a total lack of institutional legitimacy.
Like, when the audit talks about territorial coercion, what they really mean is that even in these shiny new buildings, if you want to open a corner store or just walk safely to the bus stop, you're still paying a tax to the local gang, not the government.
Exactly, and the numbers in the memo totally back that up. Colón remained one of the provinces with the highest homicide rates in the country. The violence linked to territorial disputes like gangs fighting over who controls which block, it persisted right alongside all this brand new infrastructure.
Wow.
And it points to a profound measurement failure at the absolute highest levels of government.
So they were grading themselves on a totally different rubric than reality. They were just measuring outputs, right? Like budgets executed, contracts signed, units delivered.
Right, just checking boxes. But the city doctor standard demands what they call a double bottom line. You need a financial return on investment, obviously, but you critically need a social return on investment.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. If you build 100 state-of-the-art apartments, but the neighborhood is still ruled by extortion and fear, your social return is negative. The physical assets mean nothing if the social reality is toxic.
It really makes me think of like a medical analogy, right? The report points out subsystem optimization as a root cause of failure. It's like a doctor giving a patient a shiny, state-of-the-art prosthetic leg,
Right.
but completely ignoring a systemic, life-threatening blood infection. Like, great, you've optimized the leg, the subsystem, but the patient is still dying on the table.
That is exactly what happened here.
So what does this all mean for the people actually moving into these units? They get a nice new apartment, but the blood infection of the city is still raging.
And the analytical why here is so crucial to understanding the audit's critique. The planners treated Colón purely as a housing deficit. They looked at a map and just saw, a lack of adequate apartments.
Just a structural issue.
Right. But the city doctor's framework argues that Colón was never suffering from a housing deficit. It was suffering from a territorial performance failure.
A territorial performance failure. So the very rules of the neighborhood were fundamentally broken. And I guess a new coat of paint doesn't rewrite the rules.
Exactly. When you drop new housing into an environment that's governed by illicit rent structures, fragmented policing, and weak institutional legitimacy, the housing doesn't magically change the environment. The environment simply absorbs the housing.
Which brings up a really dark question about the psychological and economic reality for these communities. Like, if giving people brand new homes didn't actually improve their lives, what happens to a neighborhood when the physical environment changes, but the economic reality just doesn't?
Yeah, and the audit identifies this phenomenon as a total absence of economic substitution.
Okay, break that down for us.
So the city doctor standard requires that whenever a state intervenes in a highly compromised territory, it must actively replace criminal rents with lawful income ladders.
You can't just displace the gang with a police raid. You have to actually replace the gang's economy.
Exactly. You have to give the teenager who was acting as a lookout a legal way to make the same amount of money.
Right.
But because MyViot only delivered physical assets and they didn't build credible legal earnings pathways alongside that housing, the new territories inevitably just reverted to the old rules of survival.
Because people still need to eat.
Exactly. And the audit uses a brutally descriptive phrase for the result here. It says, these new developments quickly became vertical slums with concrete walls instead of tin.
Vertical slums with concrete walls instead of tin. Wow. That is haunting.
It really is.
You've upgraded the building materials, but you haven't changed the human condition at all.
And that failure is directly tied to the absence of what the audit calls an earned stability contract. In a functional system, the city doctor's framework demands a fair deal between the citizen and the state.
Right.
But in Colón, a pure subsidy logic completely dominated the intervention.
Meaning the government was just giving the housing away without really asking for anything in return?
Right. The housing wasn't linked to workforce participation. Skills certification wasn't tied to the right to live in those new units. Access to public services wasn't conditional on basic civic performance.
Okay, hold on. Let me just play devil's advocate for a second here, just to make sure we're exploring this impartially.
Sure, yeah.
I'm reading this critique, and I'm thinking about the grim reality of extreme poverty. Like, if I'm a single parent living in a tin shack with a leaky roof, and the government offers me a safe, concrete apartment for free, I mean, I'm taking it.
Of course.
Even if it relies on the subsidy logic.
Yeah.
So Isn't shifting a citizen's dependency from a violent, unpredictable gang to a reliable government transfer program at least a little bit of a win? Isn't depending on the state a much safer stepping stone?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the audit vehemently argues no, it is not a systemic win at all.
Really? Why not?
It might feel less immediately violent in the short term, but unearned subsidies fundamentally fail to generate civic legitimacy.
But if the government is giving me a house, shouldn't I, be grateful and respect a government more?
You'd think so, but dependency wasn't structurally reversed, it was just redirected. Without an earned stability contract, without linking that new housing to workforce participation or educational requirements, the territory remains essentially lawless.
Oh, I see.
It's just lawless in nicer buildings. When the state acts merely as a passive provider of free assets, rather than an active partner demanding civic duty, the state totally fails to earn authority in the eyes of the residents.
Right, because there's no mutual respect.
Exactly. The gangs still control the social fabric and the daily rules of the street, while the state is basically just paying the rent.
Man, I see. It's a passive relationship rather than an active partnership. By just giving the assets away unconditionally, the state threw away the leverage it desperately needed to actually change the culture of the territory.
Precisely. They're subsidizing the status quo of poverty and coercion, just making it slightly more comfortable.
And that leads to the natural next question. How does a multi-million-dollar government initiative overlook something as fundamental as jobs, safety, and civic duty?
Yeah, and the audit points the finger directly at the structure of the bureaucracy and the election cycle itself.
Which introduces us to this great phrase, single ministry logic.
Yes, the entire massive urban renewal of Colón was dominated almost exclusively by one single ministry, MIVOT.
The housing ministry.
Right, just the housing ministry.
So it's like trying to build a car, but only the tire department gets any funding. You might end up with great wheels, but you have no engine, no steering wheel, and no brakes.
You aren't going anywhere.
Exactly.
If the underlying disease is a territorial performance failure, a single ministry is entirely useless. You need a cross-ministry operating system.
You need security forces, labor departments, housing authorities, and education boards all acting together in lockstep.
But, as the audit heavily implies, bureaucracies hate sharing power, and they absolutely despise sharing budgets.
Right. And then layer the timeline issue on top of that bureaucratic mess, because the audit highlights political cycle fragility.
Oh, this is huge.
This massive urban renewal wasn't some embedded multi-decade governance architecture meant to outlast elections. It was merely the pet project of a specific political administration.
Which is the fatal flaw of so many large-scale state interventions around the world.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me.
Okay.
Think about the physical materials being used. We are pouring concrete and setting steel that is literally engineered to last a century, right?
Right.
The building will stand for 100 years. But the social programs, the cross-agency cooperation, the funding that actually makes that building a safe, thriving place to live, that barely survives a single 4-year political term.
It's an insane mismatch of timelines.
It really is.
And treating social infrastructure as a short-term political campaign tool practically guarantees its long-term failure. An administration wants a photo op. They want to cut a ribbon before the next election cycle.
Because they need the votes.
Exactly. You can build a concrete tower in 3 years and cut a ribbon. You absolutely cannot reverse multi-generational gang dependency in 3 years.
No way.
The audit warns explicitly that you cannot build your way out of a social performance collapse.
Which brings us to the pivot. Because the audit doesn't just act as a harsh critic tearing down the past 13 years. It actually writes a new, radical prescription.
Yeah, they outline a 2026 to 2030 retrofit plan.
And what I really appreciate is that they don't say tear all these new buildings down. They say the massive investment from 2012 to 2025 isn't lost, but it must be immediately repurposed.
Repurposed from mere construction stock into active social performance infrastructure. The physical buildings are already there. The hardware is installed. Now the government needs to finally install the operating system.
Right.
And the audit outlines a very aggressive, deeply logical 4-phase plan to do exactly that.
So if the old government just threw houses at the problem without measuring the crime rate or the economy, how does this new blueprint actually force accountability? Like what happens on day one?
So phase 1 is the first 100 days. And this is entirely about resetting the baseline standard of reality. They propose publishing what they call a Colón mega scorecard.
And this scorecard is entirely focused on that double bottom line we discussed earlier, right? They're no longer just measuring tons of concrete poured.
Right. They are measuring the homicide rate, they're tracking the prevalence of extortion, they're actively looking at youth employment figures, the school-to-work transition rate, and local enterprise formation.
They're finally measuring the social reality.
Ugh.
Because, if you can't measure it, you literally can't fix it.
Exactly. And alongside that scorecard, in those first 100 days, they demand the establishment of a city doctor's steering cell.
Which directly attacks that single ministry logic problem.
Yes. This cell legally forces housing, security, labor, education, the local municipality, and the Port Authority to sit at the exact same table. And they have to share a unified